when dealing with high emotions. That's the topic for today with author, mediator, and guest today, Doug Noll of DougNoll.com. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, this is attorney Mac Pierre-Louis, a lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, and I work throughout Florida and Texas, mainly online. But today I have an outstanding guest who has talked with us before about his book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person Down in 90 Seconds or Less. And so this is Doug Noll, the author himself, is on the show talking to us this time about co-parenting tips. And so, Doug, welcome back. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Mac, I was a hardcore commercial and trial and hardcore business and trial lawyer for 22 years, litigating very large, complex financial cases in Central California. And through a series of events that I don't have time to describe, I decided that being a trial lawyer was not my calling. I went back to school in my late 40s and earned my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And I was trained by the people that started the International Restorative Justice Movement. And it was an amazing program, changed my life. But the one thing that they didn't have was a way of calming down angry people. And when I left the practice of law to become a peacemaker, I was getting called into a very high emotion, high conflict cases. And that old active listening, nonviolent communication, none of that crap worked. I had an epiphany in 2005. And that led me to develop this concept called affect labeling, which literally allows you to calm any angry person in 90 seconds or less using brain science, not pop psychology. And it worked miraculously to my amazement. And so I started studying it, developing it, and field testing it. And ultimately, the biggest field test has been the Prison of Peace Project that I co-founded with Laurel Coffer in 2010, where we have been training people serving life and long-term sentences in maximum security prisons around the world, how to become mediators and peacemakers in prisons to stop prison violence. And the very first skill we teach them is affect labeling, how to listen to emotions. And the results have been astounding. So that led to my fourth book, De-Escalate, that you mentioned, which was published in 2017, Amazon bestseller. It's now in 5 languages. And I'm devoting my life today to teaching people these skills, because in my view, they are the foundational skill of life. And for parents who are divorced and have children where conflict is almost inevitable, this is your go-to skill.
Exactly. Yeah, you mentioned the studies that you were looking at. Was that you're referring to the 2007 Matthew Lieberman study?
Yes, that's right. Putting feelings into words. That was the seminal study. There have been a number of studies since that time expanding the work. But Lieberman, who's a neuroscientist out of UCLA, did a brain scanning study that showed that when you label somebody's emotions, or when you label your own emotions, and the emotional centers of the brain are highly escalated, what happens in affect labeling is the emotional centers of the brain are diminished in activity. And at the same time, a part of the brain called the right ventral lateral prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, our executive function, is activated. So we literally calm down the emotional centers of the brain while we activate the part of our brain we need for good decision making. And it happens unconsciously and automatically.
Exactly. It was a beautiful thing. And I like how the science supports it and backs it up. But in a nutshell, to the non-scientifically minded, why does it happen?
I'm not sure that there are scientific studies that explain why it happens, but I think I have an understanding. Emotion, I'll try to make this as simple and as quick as I can. We're not born with emotions. This is something that most people don't understand. Most people think we are born with emotions, but we're not. We're born with something called affect. And at about 18 months of age, part of the developmental process is that our emotional centers of our brain come online at about 18 months, and as we start to verbalize as little children, toddlers. And one of our developmental tasks is to convert affect, which is the basic feelings of pleasantness and unpleasantness that we're born with, into cognitive constructs that we call emotions. So we have 9 basic affect.
Yep.
And and those affect, we experience them in all different intensities and different qualities throughout the day. And it's like an artist palette. So we got black, white, blue, red, and white, yellow, I think, are the primary colors. And so just like an artist will take those 5 tones and create an infinite number of colors, we have 9 affect, and our brains will take those 9 affect, and we can have an infinite number of emotional experiences.
Yeah.
When we were able to create emotion in our brains, we basically create a database of emotional experiences. And the deeper and richer our emotional database is, the more we're able to be emotionally self-aware, and the more we're able to self-regulate.
Yep.
Now, the problem is that most children live with parents who are not good at emotional regulation or awareness. And so they really never develop this skill, and they shut down between 6 and 8 years old. Their emotional maturity becomes stunted between 6 and 8 years old. And so they never really emotionally mature. And by the time they become adults, they're still at the emotional maturity of a child, even though they've got this facade of competent adulthood.
Correct.
So that when they get angry or get intense or get crazy, imagine a co-parenting situation, a divorce situation, the anger flies, they basically revert back emotionally to when they're 6 years old. Yep. So what happens when we affect label is because we're calming the brain. Now we're angry and upset and frustrated and feel disrespected. The emotional centers of our brain are overwhelming our prefrontal cortex. We can't think. All we can do is react. That's the only thing we have available to us is reactivity, because our prefrontal cortex is completely overwhelmed.
It takes over. Yeah.
When I affect label somebody that's angry like that, I'm literally lending them my prefrontal cortex for the 90 seconds it takes for the speaker's prefrontal cortex to come online and regain access to that emotional database. So they can now start processing the emotional experience. And it takes about 90 seconds for that to happen. Yeah. So essentially think of me as lending this angry person my prefrontal cortex, my emotional database, so they can start processing the emotions, and that causes everything to calm down and readjust. Yep. And I think that's what's going on. I think eventually the science will figure that out. Right now, there's no science to support that. That's my hypothesis based on my observation and understanding of science.
Got it. Well, makes sense. So then in the co-parenting context, we have a typical situation. This happens all the time around the country, right? You got 2 parents, they are separated or recently divorced. They're not together anymore. However, they still have a child or 2 together, which binds them with each other. And they have to co-parent and make common decisions. They have to, one typically pay one child support. They have to deal with possession of the children. I was going to say visitation, but some parents get upset about that. And so they have to share possession of their child. They are going to address issues that range from education decisions to, future marriage decisions of a young child. And so when we face these common challenges where high emotions and parents who just don't get along, come into fruition, how easy is it? Is it possible to even do affect labeling on that other parent? Because I can imagine if they're business partners possibly, or people who are, acquaintances. But when you have 2 individuals who, at one point loved each other, and now they, for different reasons of betrayal or having their motives judged, I think betrayal is probably the biggest one. How can there be any kind of affect labeling that would resolve their conflicts over their children?
Well, affect labeling works really well. However, it's the trick is learning it. Yeah. You can read my book, go to my YouTube channel and watch all this stuff, but until you actually get trained in the skill of affect labeling, it's probably not going to do you a lot of good, because there's a lot of nuance to it that makes the difference between it working and not working. But essentially, if you learn how to affect label, what happens is you've got an upset co-parent. Mm-hmm. upset over anything. It could be, and you've identified most of the major areas. It can be a difference in values. It can be hatred. It can be taking out all of your sense of betrayal in the marriage and taking it out on the kids. I mean, we've seen it all, and it happens a lot.
Correct.
And it's predictable. The behaviors are predictable. We see the same behaviors over and over again, and that means they're all the time. And that means they're amenable to affect labeling. When you see the same and the behaviors become predictable, yeah, okay, so we know what to do here. Basically, what you learn how to do is to see the predictability of those behaviors. This is not chaos. This is not unpredictable. This is not some person being an asshole. This is somebody who's emotional, has lost their sense of rationality because they're emotionally highly reactive. And the job we have as the co-parent, if we have the training to do this, is to get them off the window ledge. And the way we do that is by simply reflecting their emotions. Ignore the words, read their emotions, and reflect their emotions with a simple use statement. So it would go something like this. Let's suppose that you got parents that are arguing over who's going to have the child for the weekend. And something has come up. Something always comes up, right?
Yep.
And one party is really pissed off and the other party's got to calm things down. So the party who's been trained in affect labeling would say something, you're really frustrated. Man, you are really pissed off and angry.
Yep.
You feel completely disrespected by me. You feel ignored. You don't feel heard. And you feel completely unsupported and unappreciated. And you're anxious and worried and concerned. And you're just disgusted at how all this is going on. And you're sad. And you're distressed and you're upset. And you feel completely rejected and betrayed and completely abandoned. And nobody out there to support you on this. And the whole thing is just really, really pissing you off.
Yep. Well, that's going to do a lot for that person when they hear that.
Just doing that,
yep,
will calm people down. Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Well, tell me more. Well, when you do blah, 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 and you're such an asshole and you're such a prick and you do all this. So you're really still really frustrated and angry. And you feel completely betrayed. And you're really worried and concerned. And you're frightened, scared. Yeah. And you really do feel unsupported and unappreciated. Yeah. And you're worried. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? No, that's it. Okay. So let's talk about how to solve this problem.
Correct. Problem solving at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did that take? It didn't even take 90 seconds.
Correct. No, even I felt it. I mean, I was like, yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
It works. And
it works.
So how do you get co-parents there to want to do that with somebody who they feel betrayed them intensely, or someone who they think is a danger to the children, and they'll use the kids as pretext to then justify to push the other parent away.
Right.
When there's zero trust, really, that's the question. How do you do
There's
that?
no trust, and there's not going to be any trust. There's no real relationship here other than the relationship of parents. You have to decide as a parent that it's more important to do what's right for your child or your children than it is to appease or fight with your co-parent. I mean, that's the first thing you have to decide. What's most important? And you also have to have the realization that being angry and upset at your co-parent does not serve your children well. What they need is somebody who can maintain a calm, compassionate demeanor at all times, no matter the provocation. And the way you do that is by learning how to affect label. Because once you learn how to affect label, you will never have a fight or argument again in your life. That's the promise I make to all my clients. You will never have a fight or argument again in your life, even with your ex. They'll try to instigate something. They'll try to provoke, but nothing will happen because you know exactly what to say, how to say it, and when to say it to calm things down.
Exactly.
And that's the trick.
So recently we did a episode with Dr. Barbara Manuso. She was the one who actually invited you last time. And Dr. Barbara Manuso had a section in a textbook at a university that was titled, her section was titled, The Heart of Mediation. And heart was spelled, everything is capital except EAR, right? it's in the middle of heart. And so it's a play on words. And I explained, so the heart of mediation is the ear, right? The hearing aspect, the part where people want to be heard. And then the mediator's job is to help facilitate that conversation so that people can get their point across without feeling threatened or have a safe space to do it. And in Harris County or many places in Texas, we do a lot of caucus style mediations where we just get people, throw them in a room, and they don't actually hear each other. They just have the mediator go back and forth. And so Dr. Barbara Mendoza was saying, hey, there's value in having people sit together and experience something together and hear one another.
I agree.
And okay, so how does people have a need to be heard, right? How
That's right.
does that connect with affect labeling?
Okay,
And
so I've thought about this a lot, and here's the analysis that I've come up with, and this is new. No one's ever heard this before.
oh,
So
great! This is breaking
this
news.
is brand new stuff. So what I've done is I've finally understood that there are two types of listening. There's type 1 listening and type 2 listening.
Okay.
Type 1 listening is listener focused. That's where I'm asking questions to get information. I'm cross-examining, I'm getting argument, I'm arguing, I'm listening to argue, I'm fighting to be right. The focus is on me, the listener.
Got it.
And that's the kind of listening that most people do. And that's really the listening that parents do when they're in co-parenting situations. They're listening to fulfill their own agenda. Then there's type 2 listening. In type 2 listening, our focus is on the speaker. And the goal in type 2 listening is to make sure that the speaker is heard from the speaker's frame of reference. It has nothing to do with the listener. The listener is ego-free on this.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we engage in type 2 listening, we're using you statements. And we are trying to make sure the speaker feels heard and validated.
Yes.
Where we get into trouble is we don't separate out type 1 and type 2 listening. And so people engage in type 1 listening thinking that I'm listening to the other person when really what I'm doing is advocating my own agenda. So I'm listening, but I'm really not listening. When they should be engaging in type 2 listening, which is the focus comes off of me and onto the speaker. And all I'm trying to do is make sure the speaker is feeling heard.
Got it.
Affect labeling is one of 3 types. Yeah, 4 types, but for our purposes, 3 types of type 2 listening: paraphrasing, core messaging, and affect labeling.
Yes.
And when you engage in type 2 listening, you have no agenda on your own. What you're really trying to do is make sure the speaker feels heard. Paraphrasing is what it sounds like. You are reframing or restating the words the speaker is stating in your own words, summarizing, using a you statement, no I statements. None of this, what I think you're saying is X. Throw that away. It's worthless. And there's a long history behind that I don't have time to go into right now, but believe me, I studied it, I understand where it came from, and it's wrong. Then there's core messaging, which is searching for the intended meaning that the speaker is trying to express.
Yeah. So what you're trying to say is,
well, it's not even that. It's imagine somebody who is all over the place. They're thinking with their voice, and you're sitting here saying, how much time do I have with this, right? So what you do is you listen for their intended meaning, and then what you do is you state their intended meaning with a metaphor. You might say something like, so right now you are so overwhelmed, you feel like a boiler about to explode. So use a metaphor to express the meaning.
Yep.
And that calms them down, they feel heard. And then the last level is affect labeling, where you ignore the words, you ignore the meaning, you read their emotions, the emotional data fields, and you reflect back the emotions with a you statement. And there is a very specific script that I've developed that allows you to go through the script, go through the layers in a very methodical way, a very structured way that allows you to calm anybody down. And it's actually cognitively very easy to do once you learn the skill. But the problem is learning. You got to put some effort in to learn the skill. And basically, emotions come in layers. So the top layer is anger, and then we have disrespect, and then we have fear, and then we have disgust, we have sadness, or we have shame, then we have sadness, and then we have abandonment. Those are the 7 layers. And basically what you learn how to do when you're affect labeling is how to work through those 7 layers and all the words that are associated with those layers, describing what this other person is experiencing. And the reason it works is because every human being experiences the same emotions. The repertoire of human behavior and human emotion is really quite limited.
Yep.
It looks like chaos to the untrained eye.
Mhm.
But once you learn, you say, this is not chaos at all. This is normal behavior. And I know exactly what to do.
Yeah. So a lot of it, what you just said, is fascinating, and we could spend a lot of time on it, especially in a mediator's course, because we're talking about active listening, and we've talked about empathetic listening. And then, but you're referring to it now as type 2 listening,
Type 2 reflective listening.
reflective listening. So, back to the co-parent.
Mhm.
And imagine that person goes to a pickup, an exchange,
Okay.
to get the child, and they have a disagreement over, let's say the father goes to the mother's front door, but the father brought his new girlfriend with him. Okay, probably not a smart idea,
No.
but he did it because he wanted a witness. So he has
Right.
his rationale, his reason. She, however, does not want that woman on her property and around her child, of course, and doesn't want that child to even go to the same home where that person is going to be because she has her reasons. Anyway, both people are at odds. The kid is not being exchanged properly without having to witness all this chaos around them. And you have father threatening to call the police, and you have mother threatening to,
Call the police.
trespass. Yeah, exactly. We don't need this chaos. What do we do in this kind of situation? And let's assume that let's assume that both parents have some understanding of affect labeling. What could one of them possibly say?
Assuming the door isn't slammed in the father's face,
Exactly.
then the father would say something. You're really upset. You feel completely disrespected. And you feel just seeing me out here makes you have all these feelings of betrayal and rejection and sadness and grief. And you're pissed off, really pissed off at me. You don't feel respected. You don't feel heard. You don't feel it listened to. You feel completely unsupported and unappreciated, like you don't even matter.
Hmm.
And you're disgusted by it all. And you're anxious because you're worried about the kid, our child. And you're also feeling a lot of grief and sadness over the loss of our connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd stop and see what her reaction was.
Yeah, she'll say something like, "Yeah, it's all true." Right?
Okay. Is there anything else that you're feeling right now?
Hmm.
Notice the tone of my voice.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you're feeling right now? Well, no. All right. Then how are we going to? What's the best thing for our child right now? What do you think the best result is here? And what does she say?
Well, that she should see her father.
Okay. So what do we need to make? What do we need to do to make that happen in a way that makes you feel okay?
Yep. Maybe have your girlfriend go sit in the car while I have the child come to the door.
I'll agree to that. Go do me a favor and go sit in the car. We'll be right there.
Yeah.
All right. So, what else do we need to do?
Or possibly she might suggest bring a different person.
Pardon me?
She might suggest bringing a different person.
What do you mean? Oh, yeah, as a witness.
Yes.
All right. So obviously bringing my girlfriend is infuriating to you and upsetting. And I don't want to do that. And that was thoughtless of me. And I'm sorry that I didn't think of that. So if I feel the need for a witness, I will bring somebody who's neutral. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
So
all right. Well,
mm-hmm.
Is Sally ready to go?
Yes, she is. Here she goes. Go to your father.
All right. I'll bring her back here on time on Sunday or whenever.
Correct. So this happens all across the country, and unfortunately, that answer does not typically take place. What we have
are because people aren't trained.
Yeah, motions for enforcement are flying left and right because he said, she said, comes down. it's toxic, it's tiring, and the courts are backlogged with this kind of stuff. And
Right.
so you would think that parents, we kind of expect them, do better, just do better, be the bigger person, take the higher road. It doesn't work because humans are fundamentally emotional, as you write,
Right.
and we have a need for validation. We have a
Right.
need for vengeance, a need for, you know,
We have the 6 needs of victims.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. The people who have been wounded want to be righted, and a lot of times, if we don't, if we're not trained on this, we don't know this, then it doesn't. Then we keep spreading the damage, and then we do it to the next
We
generation.
just keep repeating the same behaviors over and over again because all we can do is engage in the behaviors that we were taught by our parents,
Correct.
and that's
Correct.
almost always dysfunctional. So we're going to engage in adult dysfunctional behaviors until we learn a different way, and it takes learning. This is not a skill that comes naturally. It's counterintuitive and counternormative. Once you learn it, it's magical, but it takes time to learn. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to master these skills.
Yep. There you
Uh,
go. Yeah.
it's not that it's not difficult, but it takes time. It's like learning how to ride a bicycle. When we start out as children, we learn how to stand up. We learn how to roll over. That's a big deal. Then we learn how to roll over the other way, and then we start crawling up the crib thing, and we start throwing our legs. And in a year, we start to walk a little bit, and then we start to run a little bit, and then about 3, we're ready for the tricycle.
Yeah.
So we run the tricycle for a year, and then at 4, we're ready for the small bicycle with the training wheels.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, we're ready for the 2-wheeler without the training wheels. And that's a big day because that's freedom. And it's a big day for a 40-year-old or 5-year-old. It took
Exactly.
5 years to learn how to ride a bicycle.
That's true.
I can teach you how to calm any younger person in 90 seconds in less than 8 weeks. So the
Yeah.
time investment is not difficult, but it is the same progression as learning how to ride a bike.
Yeah.
You just don't get on a bike and ride it. You just don't get out and read the book and affect label. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. So we're running out of time. So I want to just ask you and then tell you something. First, I'll tell you, one of the fascinating things I have about all of this is that we don't ever appreciate how much time it takes to do things that we think should just have been mastered at birth.
That's
Okay.
right.
Like, for example, you just said 6 to 8 weeks to master affect labeling, but most people think that they're okay. That, oh, I don't have any traumatic childhood issues. I don't have any
Wrong.
reasons why
Wrong.
I react a certain way, why I react out of anger
Wrong.
first, because, oh, well, they just triggered me. But we need to take time, and the section in your book that talks about self-awareness, we got to build self-awareness to know,
Right.
oh, I am doing this, right? So I can contribute.
That's right.
Yeah.
Every child was emotionally invalidated. That is the most insidious, pervasive
Mhm.
form of emotional abuse that exists. And I would warrant that every parent today is emotionally invalidating their children unconsciously. They don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know they're abusing their children, but they are. Whenever you
Correct.
say something like "Don't cry,"
Yeah.
or "Put on your big little panties," or "Be a big boy, don't be a sissy,"
Mhm.
Stop crying. You're emotionally invalidating your child. You're doing enormous damage to their brain.
Exactly.
You went through that. You're putting your children through it. We're just perpetuating the violence and the
Over
abuse
and over.
over and over and over
Yeah.
again.
So people need to take stock of that, appreciate that. And like you also say, grief, for example, can take 18 months to process.
That's right.
But if you see somebody as a friend and you're trying to affect label when someone's going through an emotional thing and after a grief, and you don't appreciate that, it might take 18 months for someone to go through that. There we go again. We don't appreciate and take stock of the fact that this stuff takes time and we have to master it and get good at it. All right. My question is, what about in cases where there was physical violence? Because a whole lot
If
of
there is
time.
physical violence, run.
Okay.
Do not put the child in danger. Protect yourself. Run.
Yeah.
There's no, unless you're trained in law enforcement, or you're somebody like me, a secondary black belt and a Tai Chi master, where violence doesn't bother me in the slightest.
Yeah.
But that takes decades of training. Then run. Get out. Get yourself out of the violent situation.
Yeah. So you don't need to be affect labeling an angry person who literally has a gun to your head.
That's right. Run.
Okay. That's clear. And so anybody
Run.
who's listening out there, make sure you get
Run. No.
you can understand that.
No, affect labeling will not. If it's risen to the level of violence, affect labeling at that moment will not, it'll work later, but it will not work at that moment. So
Yeah.
withdraw from the situation, protect yourself, protect the child, and consider
Yeah.
your options.
Yeah. Because remember the section you talked about, I believe it's alexithymia, the idea that
Alexithymia.
alexithymia, that
Alexithymia.
people sometimes don't have any ability to
Be self-aware.
to acknowledge it and notice that they have a problem, and so they respond
That's right.
sometimes with just anger, right, and
That's right.
physical aggression. And how do you affect that person?
Well,
So
you can affect label an alexithymic person, but if they're violent, then there's nothing you can do until that violent phase is passed. Then you can affect label them. But the problem with violence is there's too much risk of harm. So
yeah,
there's no point in taking the risk. Back off.
got it.
Escape.
All right, Doug Noll, thank you so much for this
You're welcome,
talk,
Mac.
and hopefully people will have learned something out there and got enough to then want to go get your book so they can learn even more. But everything is on dougnoll.com. And
Yeah, I've got online courses that will train you in this stuff, and also, of course, I'm available for training if you want that. And then it's all available at dougnoll.com. Just check it out.
Awesome. Yes, and if you're listening to this podcast, Doug Noll is Doug, and Noll is Noll, because I know I've spelled it with a K before. All right.
Common mistake.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, everyone. Until next time, this is lmipodcast.com, and check it out on YouTube and on Spotify. Take care, everybody.